Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this author interaction of the 2024 NLF Reading Challenge. My name is Samantha, and I hope you're as excited to be here as I am. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 3-month-long reading event from July to September 2024 for students between grades 4 to 6. It runs in the competitive as well as the non-competitive tracks. For the challenge, students read their way through a curated set of 30 books. They discuss their reading with their friends and their guide, log their thoughts, and get to interact with the authors of some of these books online. The challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies, certificates of achievement, and a wonderful set of books. For today's event, please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're from a school, please mention the name of your school along with your question as well. Today, we are honored to have with us the award-winning and prolific author Rajani LaRocca. Rajani is a physician and author of books for young people. She was born in Bangalore and immigrated to the US as a baby. A graduate of Harvard Medical School, she's been working as a primary care internal medicine physician since 2001. She's been an omnivorous reader, and now she's an omnivorous writer of fiction and nonfiction, novels and picture books, prose and poetry, including the middle grade novel in verse, Red, White and Whole, that won a 2022 Newbery Honor, the 2022 Walter Dean Myers Award, and the 2022 Golden Kite Award, among other honors. She finds inspiration in her family, her childhood, the natural world, math, science, and just about everywhere she looks. Rajani joins us today to speak about her novel in verse, Mirror to Mirror, which is on the reading list of the challenge. The novel narrates the evocative tale of 2 identical twin sisters who try to find their way back to each other as mental health struggles and secrets threaten to split them asunder. Welcome, Rajani. We are thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Rajani. Would you like to begin the session with a short reading from the book?
Yes. So I will read from the very beginning of Mirror to Mirror. Maya. She's the one. I don't like mirrors, but Chaya makes me look sometimes at our twin reflections, identical, almost. The world sees the same wavy black hair, the same big brown eyes, the same height, the same voice. But Chaya is the one with the brighter smile, the quicker laugh, the faster quip. The world sees the goofball, the talker, the second. But to me, she's the one who sees without showing, knows without telling, loves without asking. She's the one. And then the next poem is from Chaya. She's the one. People say they can't tell us apart, but that's ridiculous. In the mirror, our identical faces are still different. Maya's the one who shines and sparkles, her eye keener, ear sharper, soul deeper. Calm and composed, her music floats, soars above earthbound notes. The world sees a perfectionist. But to me, she's the one I look up to, the one I come home to, the best part of me in a separate space. She's the one.
Thanks so much for that wonderful reading, Rajani. It really brings out the flavor of the book. So we'll start off the Q&A segment at the point of inception of the story. So at a poetry workshop you attended during the pandemic, you wrote a ghazal about identical twin sisters, wondered where that came from, and started exploring the story further, which gave us the touching story of Maya and Chaya. So could you give us a peek into what the twins were like when they came into your head as a ghazal?
Yeah, so I have to tell you, this is my second novel in verse. And when I teach writing novels in verse, I basically tell people, write poems as you want to. Like you don't have to write in order. You don't have to know much about anything. You can explore and figure things out as you go along. But I do find, at least for both of the books that I wrote, that there is a poem that I tend to write early on that is basically the entire book in a poem. And this was the poem. I was, it was April of 2020. It was we were in the middle of the pandemic. Everyone was home. And I took this online poetry class and we explored various types of poetry, including ghazals. And I'd never written one before. And I thought it was really cool. Leslie Newman was the teacher. And she talked about the kind of the typical form for a ghazal, and then she talked about kind of variations that she did on it. It's just so interesting, and I thought it was wonderful. I was like, okay, so it's a love poem. There is a refrain, like a song, right? They're often sung. I was like, this is so cool, and I was so inspired that I wrote a poem. Like right after the Zoom ended, I wrote a poem, and I have to say, the final poem that ended up in the book is almost identical to what I wrote. And so you want me to read? I'll read it to you. Okay. And it's called In the Morning. And it's from Maya's point of view. We open our eyes just the same in the morning. These weeks feel like such a strange game in the morning. My sister, she sings like a lark in the morning. The look that she gives me so dark in the morning. She tosses her bed sheets aside in the morning. She puts on her armor to hide in the morning. I miss her identical smile in the morning, but I'm stuck on my separate aisle in the morning. I feel so apart from my twin in the morning, can't think of how to begin in the morning. We used to be fully in sync, day and night, and now she believes that I'm wrong and she's right. We open our eyes just the same. It's like morning. So I wrote that poem and I was like, what in the world is that? Like, what happened there? And explain that to me. And that is where the whole story started. It was always about identical twin sisters, and one of them is changed, and the other one is lamenting that she doesn't feel as close to her as she used to. And I was like, all right, now I've got an idea for a story. I've got to figure out why.
Oh, that's wonderful, Rajni. Thanks so much for that. It's so lovely for us and all our young readers to learn all this. So Rajni, we'll talk about the mirroring aspect that exists in this book. So mirrors and mirroring is an important structuring element in this book. The twins obviously mirror each other, and the parents are mirror images of each other in how they've responded to, say, keep the uncle's death. Their mom has become overly cautious while the dad has become more impulsive. And the superstition of a broken mirror is a trigger point for Maya's anxiety. So, when did you decide to frame this story through the idea of mirrors and mirroring?
So I think that it was always part of the story because I was fascinated with the idea of two people who look exactly the same as each other, but who are very different on the inside. And of course, that's true for all twins, right? Like they're individual people, even if they look the same. So I wanted to really explore that. And I thought, so not only is it about, twin sisters who look identical, but are different on the inside, but also a mirror is a representation of what you show the world and also what you see in yourself. So I think that was the other thing that I wanted to play with, is that what is the real me? Is it the vision that I give the world, or is it what I see when I look in the mirror, which is a flawed person? So that was kind of where it came from. And then, I mean, what was really interesting is that I remember when I was a kid, I broke a mirror by accident. And like it was very interesting. I think so. My mom's first reaction was like, "Oh my God, that's like really bad luck. Like, why'd you do that?" And I was like, I was like, I don't know. And then, I mean, I didn't mean to. But then somebody else was like, "Oh no, that's not a big deal. Don't worry about it." So it was interesting. And I think that all of us have logical parts of our brain and also parts that are more likely to believe in kind of superstitious stuff. And I think that it was interesting for somebody who's already kind of struggling with anxiety to a certain extent, to have something happen that is clearly bad luck, I think was kind of the beginning of Maya kind of going in one direction in the story.
Yeah. So this actually really ties up with the next question that we have, which is from an audience member, Nandana, a grade 4 student of Navadisha Montessori in Chennai, who specifically asks you, why did you weave in ancient beliefs and superstitions into the story of two young girls growing up in modern and contemporary America?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First of all, I love hearkening back to ancient stories and superstitions because I think they really do inform us, whether or not we believe them. I think that they're part of our collective consciousness. So I think that it's something that we're all aware of, even if we say, oh, I don't really believe that's true. Or, what if there's a part of your brain, I think, that is always like, wait a minute, is it true or is it not true? Who can say, right? Because I think what's really hard about being a person, but especially about being a child, is that there is so much in the world that we don't control. And so you look for an explanation. And if you start believing, certain explanations from when you're very little, like my actions caused bad things to happen, they take root in us. And then it's very, very hard to get past that. But yeah, I think that almost everything, like most of my novels, feature characters who are at least aware of old stories and beliefs and traditions, and they affect how they think, whether or not they actually follow them.
Great. Thanks for that, Rajni. I'm sure Nandana was very thrilled to hear that. But we now have a question for you about the mental health picture in the story. So Maya's anxiety and her desperate attempts to hide it from her parents starts driving a wedge between her and Chaya. Later, we find out that the twins' friends, Anisa and Jay, as well as their mother and grandmother, have gone through similar struggles. So, why was it important for you to explore mental health in this story? And what do you hope young readers and caregivers will take away from it? And also, if I may add to that question, how was the experience of writing this book during the pandemic when people around the world were dealing with anxiety and illness?
Yeah, I I wanted to write about anxiety and depression because they're very common, right? Lots of people struggle with this, including children. And I wanted young readers to be aware that the first step to getting better is to tell somebody and to get help. Because I think that throughout history, even now, but especially throughout history, it's been very hard for people with mental health struggles to feel safe about sharing them, even with their most loved ones, because there's a stigma associated with mental health struggles. But they're really very, very common, and I think the pandemic just heightened that for everyone. I think the people who didn't have anxiety started to experience anxiety. I mean, rightfully so. The world was kind of crazy at that time. And then people who already had mental health struggles, a lot of them got a lot worse. So I know this from my job as a doctor. I know my own patients struggled with it. I mean, our own families struggled with it. It was a very difficult time for many people. I think that one good thing about growing up now versus growing up when I grew up is that I think it's much more common for people to talk about mental health nowadays, which is good. Because, like I said, the only way to get better is to say that explain how you're feeling so that somebody can help you. And especially as a child, it's very important that you have adult figures in your life that you can trust, who you can share this kind of stuff with. The other thing I wanted to kind of touch upon is that as an immigrant, and immigrant populations in particular have a very hard time sharing mental health struggles, because I think that to a certain extent the immigrant mentality is that I have to be perfect, because if I am not perfect, that's a weakness, and that means that that's going to be exploited in this country where I came here, right? And so I think there's a lot of reluctance among immigrant families also to share mental health struggles. I think the mom in this story is kind of an example of that. And she's unwittingly making it harder for her kids to share things with her. She does not intend to do that, but ends up being the result. So the other thing I'll just touch on is that this book is for children, but there are lots of adult characters in the story, and I wanted to make it clear that adults are not perfect either. That adults make mistakes, that adults have struggles. They may not handle them the way that is ideal, but where there's love, there's always an opportunity to improve things.
Yeah, thanks, Rajni, for that. We now have two related audience questions for you on the verse format. First from Inklab, Ayan, and Shiv, three grade 5 students from the Sri Ram School in New Delhi, who asked, could you talk a bit about how you approached writing the shape poems in Mirror to Mirror, such as Hurricane, and what inspired you to use them in the book? And another question from Divyansh, a grade 6 student from Sagar Public School in Bhopal, who asks, since this is an emotionally charged story, did you feel that the verse format will allow readers to understand the twins' mental struggles better?
Oh, great question. So the concrete poems, those shaped poems, right? Those are really fun to write. And the reason why I wanted to write them is because sometimes seeing something on a page that reflects the words and reflects the emotions is even more fun and more evocative than reading the poetry by itself. So let's see, there's a poem in the beginning that is shaped like a tree, right? It's about the little brother who likes to climb. And there is a poem in when they're at camp that looks like a cabin. It looks like a camp cabin, and it's all about how I think it's from Chaya's point of view. Chaya is in this cabin pretending to be Maya, and it feels oppressive. It feels like, oh my goodness, like what have I gotten myself into? And then the hurricane one. So I wanted to. So there's I mean, the one of the metaphors in the book is that when Maya has these panic attacks, they feel like a storm of silence, right? And so I thought that making it look like a hurricane with all of those spokes coming out of it and that center, the center there, and in the middle of a hurricane, even though it's got huge winds and it's very loud and very disruptive, in the eye of the hurricane, it's silent. And so I was like, that is cool. So that brings together kind of the music of the language and also visually what Maya feels like. And then in terms of writing poetry to talk about emotional topics, I think poetry is one of the most like perfect ways to talk about emotional topics because you use fewer words on the page, and that leaves more space on the page and more space in our minds and in our hearts to kind of understand what's going on. I think that when you use fewer words, it can take something that may be too heavy if you wrote it in prose and make it easier to deal with and also to understand. So I'll tell you a secret. When I first wrote the first draft of this novel, Maya's voice was in poetry and Chaya's voice was in prose. And I turned that in, but I have to tell you, it was really hard to write like that because I was like, wait a minute, my brain is in poetry mode. I'm just going to write a chunk of Maya's stuff and then I'm going to go back over here and write Chaya's stuff. And my editor, she said, I really love this, but she said, I think both of them need to be in poetry. And I was like, oh boy. I was like, okay, well, how do I make them separate? How to make them distinct from each other? So that was one of the challenges in revision.
Oh, you're right. Thanks so much for that, Rajani. I'm sure the kids were really thrilled to hear and learn all of that. So let's talk about your research process for this book. In the acknowledgements to Mirror, you mentioned that you interviewed several sets of identical twin sisters for this book, and that you were astounded by how close they were. Are there any particular moments or anecdotes that stand out for you? And were there stories of competition, rivalry, and insecurities alongside stories of deep connection and love that influenced the writing of this book? And this also connects to a question from a live audience member, Shanaya from Fountainhead School, Surat, who asks, what made you keep the personalities of both the twins so separate and so distinct from each other?
So all the people that I interviewed for this book were identical twin sisters. They're all adults. And one of the first interviews, they're identical twins. They're both doctors. They both married doctors who do the same kind of, I mean, it was hilarious. And they look like identical. So I was like, okay. But they said to me, one of them said to me, she said, you know that moment when you have a baby and you think, oh my goodness, here's somebody that I would do anything for, like I would die for this person. She said, I've known what that feels like all of my life. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't think anyone's ever said that to me, right? That gave me the chills. I was like, that is a connection. Another Another set of twins, the sister said, yeah, when I was in college and looking around to find a life partner, I knew that I wasn't looking for my soulmate because I already had my soulmate. My mother-in-law is an identical twin, and she and her sister have these spooky stories of like one of them getting hurt and the other one feeling it. Like it was wild. It was really wild, the connections. I did not hear any, like nobody really shared anything about rivalry or difficulty. I think people had like some of it was frustration that like sometimes people that should have been able to know who they were and tell them apart didn't, weren't able to, kind of thing. So sometimes a little bit like we're still individual people, even though we're very close to each other. So that was really interesting. And then what was the other question? The
students asking you what made you keep the personalities of the two twins so distinct and so diverse.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that this part of storytelling, right, is that you want to keep your characters distinct from each other because otherwise it gets confusing for the reader. So I wanted to make sure, Maya's voice is more traditionally poetic and Chaya's voice is much more colloquial and she has kind of longer phrases. And I tried to keep it like that to make it clear who was talking. I don't know about you, but I've known a bunch of twins whose like their names are very similar to each other. I thought that was fascinating. I think particularly in Indian families, we like to do that. We like to make the names similar. And when I thought of these two twins, I hadn't named them yet, and I went and thought about a bunch of names that I could use, and I was like, oh. Maya and Chaya. I was like, those are very popular names, right? Yeah. And then I was like, where does this, when I reminded myself of what the name Chaya means, what that story what that story is, and I was like, whoa, like, can you imagine? So like you were the second one and you were named Chaya and it literally means shadow. I was like, that's a little rough. But I love that name. I mean, I love the name, but I also love the idea that this is like something that somebody is rediscovering about their own name and being like, wait a minute.
Right. Thanks for that, Rajani. I never thought that I'd be able to laugh about this aspect of the book. So Rajani, we now have a question about how music sort of defines the book itself. And music forms the shared language of the twins in the book. The parents, for instance, are described as major and minor chords. Their friends are compared to the instruments that they play. And there's a point where Chaya describes J as the note that marks the perfect interval between her and Maya. We could say that music is the lens through which the twins make sense of the world. In Red, White and Whole, your previous novel in verse, we saw many of your own childhood anxieties and struggles in Reha, the protagonist. In Mirror to Mirror, it seemed like your training as a pianist was the part of you that made its way into the book. So what we want to ask you is, are there other parts of you in this book? And is your relationship with music similar to the twins' relationship with music?
Ooh, that's such a great question. So there are many things about this question. So one is that music plays a huge part in almost every book that I write. I really do think that music is kind of one of the most fundamental things that we as people kind of can relate to. And isn't it amazing, like how different music can be? I mean, music can be kind of something that a tradition that is passed on from in families for centuries. It can be something from a completely different tradition. I mean, I grew up playing Western classical music, which is not where my family is from. It can be something popular on the radio that like unites you with millions of people across the world because you're all listening to the same song. It can be something that you do privately in your own home. You can listen to it, you can play it, you can write it. I mean, it's incredible, right? And so I love putting music in all of my books. Midsummer's Mayhem has music in it, as does Red, White, and Whole, as does Mirror to Mirror, as does Sona and the Golden Beast, which is my fantasy that just came out. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a theme in everything I write because I think it's important and essential. Yeah, so some of my own experience playing classical piano came into this book. I love the musical metaphors, so I love the minor chord, major chord about the parents. I love dissonance, right? The idea that he's the dissonant chord that mars their perfect interval. I love when Chaya goes to her piano teacher and says, I want to quit music because she's trying to be different from Maya, that the teacher uses a musical metaphor. She says, have you heard of the term a piacere? And she's like, I don't know what that means. And it means play at your pleasure, which means play it however you want to, which means you don't have to play the same music she plays, which I thought was so cool. So yeah, I love so much about music, and I think that there's a lot about music that is a good analogy for real life. And I mean, I think that all of us have a perfectionist streak to a certain extent. I was not like the best piano player, but I really tried my best, and I tried to be the best that I could for when I was playing. And now music is just for fun. So both of my children are very musical. They both play piano. They both sing. My son plays the trumpet. And he like arranges music. They're both really incredible. So it's become a different kind of thing for me now because the kids, it's not about being the best. It's about doing something for pleasure and making something together. So sometimes when they're home, and I mean, they're both grown ups now. They don't live here anymore. When they're home, they'll play. Like they'll just go and one of them will play the piano and they'll sing together, or one of them will sing and the other will play trumpet. It's pretty cool. And I just try to be quiet and listen from the other room.
Oh, that's lovely. So Rajani, we are 2 minutes away from closing the session. So we'll leave you with one last audience question from Sahana, Darshini, and Sanvi, three grade 6 students from National Public School in Bangalore, who ask, what have been some of the most memorable reactions or discussions from readers about Mirror to Mirror? And were there any interpretations of the story or its themes that surprised you?
Wow, what a great question. So I have to say one of the most fun, like some of the best reactions I've gotten have been from twins who say to me, you understand what it is to be a twin. You understand how close people can be and yet not understand everything about each other. I think that's the key, right? If you can literally have the same DNA as this other person, but you're two separate people, you still cannot fully understand everything about the other person unless they tell you. And so that's one of the things that I wanted people to think about here, right? Literally, you're the same person as this other person, but you're also completely different people. So if something is hurting you, you have to say it. You can't just assume that they're going to understand. Yeah. So, and then I think people really enjoyed the dual point of view, which I'm glad that they enjoyed it because it was very hard to do. Every time I write a book with more than one point of view, I'm like, why did I decide to do this again? It would have been much easier to just do one person. My God. So yeah, so that's always been fun. And I really do appreciate people with who have anxiety, or all of us who went through the pandemic and experienced anxiety at that point. Also kind of sharing that it was helpful to them to see a character struggle with wanting to tell anybody that they felt this way, and then go on and tell them and have hope at the end that things were going to get better. So yeah, those are the things. It always surprises me when people say things like, "Oh, I have that," I related to that, and it's like not anything that I imagined anyone would say to me. But that was really helpful. And then I think that everyone really does enjoy the switching places at camp.
I'm sure. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for speaking with us today, Rajani. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for reading, and happy evening in India.
Yeah. Bye, Rajani. We wish you all the very best with your upcoming.
Thank you. Bye.